Hello and good day, everyone. My name is Darlena Birch, MBA, RDN, and most importantly, public health dietitian. Welcome to my YouTube channel, where I talk about U.S. federal nutrition programs, the important role they play in ensuring the health and well-being of all Americans, and how public health dietitians work tirelessly to support these amazing programs. Now, today's episode, I'm going to talk about the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, better known as WIC. Now, as I stated in my second episode, WIC was established in 1972 by an amendment to the 1966 Child Nutrition Act and became a permanent program in 1974. So now I'm just going to do a brief overview of what I highlighted in my second episode regarding the history of the WIC program. Now, in 1972, WIC was first piloted as a supplemental food program aimed at improving the health of pregnant mothers, infants, and children in response to growing concern over malnutrition among many poverty-stricken mothers and young children. By 1974, the first WIC site opened in Kentucky in January, and it was also operating in 45 states in that year alone. That is also the same year that WIC became a permanent program. By 1975, eligibility was extended to non-breastfeeding women up to 6 months postpartum and to children up to age 5. Originally, the program provided supplemental foods to children until the age of 4 and to breastfeeding postpartum mothers. In 1978, legislation was introduced that brought in new elements to the WIC program. For one, nutrition education had to be provided. The second element was that supplemental foods needed to contain nutrients found lacking in the target population. And thirdly, states needed to coordinate referrals to social services, including immunization, alcohol and drug abuse prevention, child abuse counseling, and family planning. By 1992, WIC introduced an enhanced food package for exclusively breastfeeding mothers to further promote breastfeeding. And then in 1997, USDA implemented the Loving Support Makes Breastfeeding Work campaign to increase breastfeeding rates among WIC mothers and improve public support of breastfeeding. Now, I do want to take a moment to backtrack a little bit here and highlight how the Homeless Children Nutrition Improvement Act of 1992 required USDA to establish a national breastfeeding promotion program and foster wider public acceptance of breastfeeding in the U.S. So by 2004, the Breastfeeding Per Counselor initiative was actually launched, and this allowed women with breastfeeding experience and training who were often past WIC participants themselves to become counselors that could support other women learning to breastfeed within the WIC program. Now, in 2009, based on the Institute of Medicine's recommendations, USDA introduced a new food package with foods consistent with the dietary guidelines for Americans and established dietary recommendations for infants and children over 2 years of age. This was pretty important because it was the first time that the WIC food package had been overhauled and reviewed since the program's inception in 1974. So this 2009 review allowed for fruits, vegetables, and culturally sensitive substitutes for WIC foods to become part of the WIC food package, and it also allowed mothers who exclusively breastfed their infants to receive more healthy foods with the enhanced WIC food package for exclusively breastfeeding mothers. So thanks for bearing with while I gave a high-level overview of what I discussed in episode 2 regarding the history of the WIC program. And just some fast facts that I just want you to keep in mind is that this program first became permanent in 1974, so it is very close to hitting the 50-year mark in terms of age. Additionally, since the program's inception, a lot has been done to try and promote and improve breastfeeding rates among WIC participants. And while no food package changes took place between 1974 and 2009, the food package changes that USDA has implemented were done so with the intent to better align the WIC food package with the dietary guidelines for Americans, along with other established dietary guidance. So next I'm going to talk about who qualifies to participate in the WIC program. If you are an income-eligible woman, infant, or child up until their 5th birthday, then you are eligible to participate in the program. In fact, roughly 50% of infants and a quarter of children between the ages of 1 and 4 in the US are actually served by the WIC program. But where can you go to receive WIC services? As it turns out, WIC services are provided in a variety of locations, including county health departments, hospitals, mobile clinics and community centers, schools, public housing sites, migrant health centers and camps, and Indian Health Service facilities. Now, one thing I do want to point out before I move on to the next segment of my episode is that WIC is not an entitlement program. What that means is that the WIC program is not actually guaranteed funding every year like some of the other public health programs are. And as a result, there are organizations that lead the effort in trying to help to ensure that the WIC program receives adequate funding every year. I'll talk more about this later on in my episode. So what does it look like to actually enroll in the WIC program? So the first part of enrolling within the WIC program would be to locate your nearest clinic. If you do not know where your closest WIC clinic is, you can visit www.signupwic.com to locate your nearest clinic. You can do this by either typing in your zip code or your street address, and a list of the closest clinics should pop populate for you. Once you've made your appointment, the next step will be to have you get certified into the program. During the certification process, WIC staff will want to collect your first and last name, address, and proof of income. I do want to state here that if you participate in a program like SNAP, Medicaid, or TANF, then you may be adjunctively eligible to participate in the WIC program. What adjunctive eligibility means is that if you participate in these programs and can provide your proof that you are an active participant of them, then that will count as your income to enroll within the WIC program. There are other programs outside of the 3 that I just mentioned that will also allow you to be adjunctively eligible into WIC, but I recommend contacting your local WIC clinic so you can learn more. Now, once they finish collecting your name, proof of address, proof of income, and any additional supporting documentation that they may need, they'll move on to the anthropometric measurements. During the anthropometric portion of your certification process, they will collect your height, weight, and your iron. So you may be wondering why iron is collected as part of the certification process for WIC. If you recall in episode 2, I talked about how a lot of these federal nutrition programs started in the early 70s, and it was a result of a lot of the increased awareness regarding hunger in America during the 1960s. One of the notable issues was the prevalence of iron deficiency anemia, and this is why WIC screens for iron deficiency anemia, because it's the #1 most common cause of anemia in the US. Once your height, weight, and iron status have been collected, you'll move on to the nutrition assessment portion of your certification appointment. During the nutrition assessment portion of the certification process, various questions will be asked of you depending on who is enrolling into the WIC program. If you are a pregnant mother that's enrolling into the program, then they may be asking questions about your diet and how well you're eating. If you're enrolling your newborn infant into the program, then the WIC staff may ask about how many wet or dirty diapers that your infant has had on average. The nutrition assessment portion of the certification process is followed by the nutrition education piece. WIC staff are trained to use a participant-centered approach when providing nutrition education to WIC participants. What that means is meeting the WIC participant where they're at, rather than throwing information that the WIC staff member may deem appropriate. This involves asking questions and inquiring about any nutrition-related concerns that the WIC participant may have, and then tailoring the nutrition education based on that feedback. Once the nutrition education piece of the certification process has been completed, then there will be referrals provided. So if you have a WIC mom who comes in and you realize she's pretty food insecure, you may refer her over to SNAP. Or if you have a pregnant mom who comes into the clinic and realize that she hasn't seen a doctor yet, you may refer her to Medicaid or the local community clinic. Once the appropriate referrals have been provided, the certification process wraps up with the issuance of benefits. Now in WIC, food benefits are issued instead of a dollar amount that you spend at the grocery store. So what that means is that on a WIC participant's EBT card, rather than seeing the dollar amount, you would see something like 1 dozen eggs, 1 pound of cheese, 3 gallons of milk, 16 ounces of whole wheat bread. Now, if this is the first time you're being certified into the WIC program, then the WIC staff member will go over the WIC food package for you, because the WIC food package also varies from state to state. So the types of foods and brands that you purchase will vary depending on where you live. Now, I do want to clarify that the overview that I gave regarding certification to the WIC program is very high level, and there are nuances depending on what state and what local agency you visit. So by no means was this intended to be a super thorough, detailed explanation of how the certification process works, nor should you necessarily expect your certification process to look exactly as the way I explained it to be. So I'm going to conclude today's episode by talking about the various layers of the WIC program. Now, I touched on this during my second episode, but within WIC there are basically 3 layers. Going from bottom up, there is the first layer, which is the local agency, the second layer, which is the state agency, and then the third layer, which is the federal agency. Now, at the local agency, this is where direct services are rendered to WIC participants. So a participant will come into their local agency to get certified into the WIC program. If they have any questions or concerns or need to reschedule their WIC appointments, they will contact the local agency. In my experience, the amount of interaction between WIC participants and the state agency is minimal. Most of the interaction between WIC participants and WIC staff occurs at the local agency level. At the state agency level, this is where you'll tend to see more focus on policy and programmatic issues. Although the state office will communicate to the local agency as well as the federal agency, they tend not to communicate too much with WIC participants. Now, one layer above the state agency is the federal agency. Within WIC, there are 7 USDA regional offices. The 7 USDA regions are the Northeast region, the Mid-Atlantic region, the Southeast region, the Midwest region, the Western region, the Mountain Plains region, and the Southwest region. Now, the reason for these 7 regional offices is because depending on where the state agency is located in the U.S., they'll be assigned the appropriate regional agency. So if a state agency has any questions regarding WIC policy, they will reach out to their regional office. Now, in addition to the 7 regional offices, there is actually the main national office of USDA's Food and Nutrition Services, which is located in Alexandria, Virginia. At USDA's FNS, they do a lot of high-level work with regards to policy within the WIC program. Now, the final layer of the WIC program that I want to talk about is the National WIC Association. NWA is the go-to voice of and for WIC leaders at the nation's more than 12,000 WIC locations across the country. Now, if you remember earlier in my episode, I talked about how WIC is not an entitlement program. So one of the biggest roles of NWA is to advocate and lobby to help ensure that WIC receives adequate funding every year. NWA is the go-to voice of and for WIC leaders at the nation's more than 12,000 WIC locations across the country. It provides member-driven advocacy, educates, guides, and supports WIC staff, and drives innovation to improve and strengthen WIC for the health of the nation's over 6 million women, infants, children, and their families. One thing I do want to clarify about NWA is that they're a national nonprofit, so they are not a part of any government agency. They are not USDA. They are not the state office. They are not a local agency. Therefore, NWA actually doesn't have any authority to write, implement, or create WIC policy. So I know today's episode was a little bit shorter, but I'm going to dedicate a few episodes actually to go into a thorough deep dive about the WIC program, since this is the program I'm the most familiar with. Thank you for joining me today. If you like what you see, please smash the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And remember, you are your own best advocate. Feed your body well, nourish your soul, nurture your mind, and nutrify your spirit. Remain true to yourself and never forget that every second forward is another opportunity to be a better version of your past self.